Rowan Mercer arrived at the Bellwether River port in the kind of morning that made every hard edge look recently invented. The river was a cold sheet of pewter. The cranes stood above it with their long necks bent inward, motionless for once, as if they had been caught listening. The administration building sat on a rise above the loading lanes, all tinted glass and brushed steel and tasteful signage. Below it, the working port spread out in long bands of concrete, chain link, stacked containers, truck bays, fuel tanks, and painted lanes that only meant something if you knew what moved over them after midnight. Rowan stepped out of the rental car wearing a dark coat, carrying one canvas bag, and already knowing three things. First, Dell had not died by accident. Second, everybody in the building above the yard would prefer that sentence not exist. Third, the first person who tried to help Rowan would be in danger before lunch. The receptionist on the third floor had practiced eyes. She took in the coat, the bag, the face that matched the dead man's well enough to produce a flicker of discomfort, and the fact that Rowan had arrived 15 minutes early. "Mr. Vale is ready for you," she said. Rowan nodded. "I'm sure he is." The conference room had a wall of glass facing the river and a table too long for honest conversation. There were white flowers near the far end. That was new. Somebody had remembered grief as a visual requirement. Gideon Vale rose before Rowan reached the chair opposite him. He had silver at the temples, an expensive blue tie, and a face arranged into civic concern. The arrangement was good. It might have worked on television. It had probably worked on donors. "Rowan," he said, "I'm deeply sorry about your brother." Rowan sat down. "You told the police he entered a moving lane against protocol." Vale's expression did not fail. It only tightened, very slightly around the mouth. "I told them what the initial review indicated. That wasn't my question." Vale lowered himself back into his chair. Two other people were already at the table, one from legal, one from risk. Neither had introduced themselves. Neither looked like they had ever been outside after dark. "There was a tragic operational failure," Vale said. "We hired you because your firm specializes in post-incident continuity review. I want you to have full confidence that we intend to cooperate." "Good," Rowan said. "Start with the original night ledger, the camera archive, all incident reports in their earliest versions, and the full gate records for the last 90 days. The legal woman glanced at Vale. That was the first honest thing in the room. Vale folded his hands. "That is a great deal broader than the incident itself. Your people already decided what the incident itself was. I wasn't brought in to admire the conclusion." The risk man shifted in his chair. Vale kept his voice gentle. "Your brother's death was painful for all of us." "No," Rowan said. "It was useful for some of you. If it had only been painful, you wouldn't have rewritten the time code." Silence moved around the table. Vale's eyes lost their civic warmth altogether. "I'm sorry?" 2 incident reports. 2 timestamps. One created before dawn, one after. Different fonts on the minute field. Somebody corrected something and didn't know the printer driver changes the number spacing. You should really keep old lies on the same machine as the new ones. The legal woman looked at the folder in front of her as if it might explain itself. Vale leaned back. "You move very quickly. Only when I'm being hurried." The flowers sat at the far end of the table with their white heads angled toward the windows. Rowan looked at them for 1 second and thought of Dell coming home from night shift, with damp cuss and paper dust on his sleeves. Dell had liked systems, not institutions. He liked the place where order lived after the speeches were over. When they were children, he had alphabetized the pantry by expiration date and called it Mercy. He had not stepped under a moving forklift by mistake. Vale opened a smooth leather folio. "We'll provide access. Of course, but I would encourage us all not to let grief create suspicion where evidence doesn't yet support it." The legal woman startled. Vale stayed seated. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Downstairs." "To do what?" "Find the first person in this building who still knows the difference between records and stories." The elevator smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and overheated wiring. The yard level smelled better. Diesel, wet rope, iron, stagnant river water, coffee that had boiled too long in a break room machine. Human work. Bellwether's day shift was waking up in strips of motion. Tug drivers crossed between lanes. A maintenance cart whined over a patch seam in the concrete. Above it, all the cranes had started moving again, slow enough to look deliberate. Rowan walked past receiving, past dispatch, and toward the low brick office used by night operations, where the windows were cloudy with old stickers and years of weather. No flowers there, no glass wall either. Inside, two clerks looked up from monitors, saw the coat, and decided instinctively not to know anything. A woman in a reflective jacket stepped out from a side room carrying a clipboard and a mug. She had dark hair twisted up with a pencil, a scar along one knuckle, and the kind of exhausted stillness that belonged to people who had been relied on too long. "You Mercer?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Mercer. Night operations." "Mostly." She took a sip from the mug. "Depends how badly day shift is failing that week." Rowan looked at the floor mat pinned behind her desk. Lane 6. Camera blind spot. Temporary reroute marked in red. Someone had crossed out a storage assignment with the furious pressure of a ballpoint pen. "Did Dell ever panic?" Rowan asked. Mara did not answer right away. She set the mug down, looked past Rowan to make sure the two clerks had returned their eyes to their screens, then walked to the door and shut it. "No," she said. Dell irritated people. Dell corrected people. Dell stayed late to fix numbers managers broke because they thought midnight meant math stopped mattering. But panic, she shook her head once. "No, who found him? Security. Who called it in? Security. Who reviewed the footage gap? Security." This time there was a dry little edge to her voice. "You seeing the shape of things yet?" Rowan turned back to the floor map. "I'm seeing a lid." "Good word. What was Dell looking at?" Mara hesitated. Not because she didn't know, because she was deciding whether knowing Rowan would help more than it would hurt. "Night reconciliation," she said finally. "Containers get assigned, moved, scanned, weighed, stored, rerouted. Day shift loves clean dashboards. Night shift gets the bodies and the corrections. Dell caught numbers that didn't line up. At first I thought it was sloppiness. Then I thought it was pressure from above. Then Dell started keeping his own notes." Rowan looked at her. "Where?" "He didn't tell me. But you know there were notes. Because Dell was scared enough to make a joke about them." Mara lifted the mug again without drinking. That was how he got when things stopped feeling local. He made jokes in a very flat voice and waited to see if anyone else heard the alarm. That landed harder than Rowan expected. Dell had done that as a boy, too. He would hold up a broken latch or a burnt fuse and say, "Well, that's not ideal," in the same tone another child would use to announce rain. Rowan moved to the nearest terminal. "Pull the night manifests for the week before he died." "I don't have that level anymore." "Taken from you?" Mara gave a humorless smile. "Reorganized. Who has it?" "People upstairs who only come down here in daylight." Rowan nodded once. "Then we start somewhere else." They spent the next 2 hours walking the flow Dell would have walked. Receiving to way station to cold storage to the sealed lanes leading toward the river cranes. Rowan said very little. Mara said only what mattered. Which door locked badly? Which scanner failed in wet weather? Which supervisor signed logs without reading them? Which security camera pointed where it mattered? And which only suggested coverage to visitors? By noon, Rowan knew more about Bellwether than anyone in the conference room had expected, and less than Dell had died for. That was enough to establish a method. Dell's official books were clean in the way polished surfaces were clean. The numbers aligned too easily. Error clusters that should have happened randomly were grouped into patterns. A load moved from Yard C to Lane 4 at 1:12 a.m., and then somehow appeared in storage at 1:08. A truck exited with a declared weight lighter than what had entered, yet the receiving seal remained unchanged. Small things if you wanted them to be small. The kind of things a local system could teach itself to call noise. Rowan did not call them noise. At 4 in the afternoon, Vale sent down an invitation to dinner. Rowan declined. At 5, he sent a different invitation, this one phrased as access. He would have full records prepared in his office at 6:30. Rowan went. The legal woman was gone. So was Risk. Vale was alone, sleeves rolled once, tie loosened just enough to suggest shared burden. He had laid out 3 file boxes on the conference table like tribute. "You were right," he said. "The timestamp discrepancy shouldn't have happened." "No. It was a formatting issue during consolidation." "No." Vale rested both palms on the back of a chair. "Rowan, this place processes millions of dollars in material every week. Imperfection is not conspiracy. Depends on the pattern. And what pattern do you think you found?" Rowan did not answer the question. "Who told you Dell had debts?" The pause was slight. Rowan liked slight pauses. They meant a person had found 2 possible lies and needed to pick one. "I said there had been discussion," Vale answered. That was perhaps too loose a phrasing. Meaning there were no debts. Meaning grief makes people hear accusation. Rowan stepped closer to the file boxes and opened the first one. Fresh paper. Too fresh. The pages had been printed recently and collated by category. Good for presentation, useless for truth. "These are copies," Rowan said. "Of course. I asked for originals. And these are what we have available without disrupting operations." Rowan closed the lid. "Then I'll disrupt operations myself." Vale's voice sharpened for the first time. "Careful." Rowan looked at him. That's what Dell was. Something crossed Vale's face then. Not guilt. Something more useful. Annoyance. He had expected sorrow to make Rowan dramatic or pliable. What he had instead was a person treating his building like a machine to be read. "You are a contractor," he said. "Don't mistake access for authority." "Authority is what people say controls a place," Rowan replied. "I'm still working out what actually does." That night, Rowan stayed on site. Bellwether changed after dark. Day shift had a rhythm that could fool visitors into thinking efficiency and order were the same thing. Night shift stripped that illusion off. What remained was timing, fatigue, pressure, and the constant argument between paperwork and gravity. Mara found Rowan near the reefer lanes at 11:15, staring at a row of containers marked for outbound transfer. "You should sleep," she said. Later, "You keep saying that, and then midnight happens anyway." Rowan pointed at the lane schedule on the tablet in hand. "This sealed transfer window, who signs off?" "Kel's on security. Someone from executive if the load's sensitive." "Why?" "Because your dud zone on camera 12 overlaps it by 13 minutes. Mara swore quietly. They watched from the shadow of a maintenance shed while 2 trucks rolled into the restricted lane. Security was tighter than it needed to be for ordinary cargo. Kells himself was there in a black jacket, broad in the shoulders, talking into a radio with the casual authority of a man who had never had to prove he belonged in a room. "He always comes down for those?" Rowan asked. "Only when he thinks he has to." "Good." Mara studied Rowan in profile. "You say that a lot too. Because things keep confirming themselves." The trucks halted. One container came off the first rig and onto a lane tug. In the floodlights, the serial number was visible for only a second. Rowan had already memorized it. By 1:30, Rowan knew the serial on the outbound manifest did not match the serial on the box that had moved through the restricted lane. Kells had seen Rowan in the yard. That was fine. Sometimes being seen did useful work. At 1:48, Kells intercepted Rowan alone between storage rows. He arrived without hurry, which told Rowan he trusted the ground too much. "Long night," Kells said. "Depends who it's long for." Kells stopped 6 feet away. He smelled faintly of gun oil and wintergreen gum. "You keep wandering into places that complicate your contract." "Seems like the places are complicated already." "You're not local." "That's true." "And let me save you time." Kells's tone stayed even. "Your brother made himself useful to the wrong people. And then he made himself difficult. That's sad. Doesn't make this your war." Rowan looked past him toward the dark lane opening. 2 blind corners, 1 camera gap, 1 unlogged trailer transfer at 23:17, Rowan said. "You should move your little side business out of a yard built for repetition. Repetition is how people learn." Kells went still. "Good," Rowan thought. "You think you're clever," Kells said. I think you're lazy. The first step Kells took forward was meant to change the terms of the conversation. Rowan let him have half of it. Then Rowan shifted just enough that Kells's reaching hand found empty air, caught the sleeve instead of the wrist, and got turned past center. Not a fight, a correction. Kells recovered quickly. Better than most. Easy, Rowan said. You don't want to be the second bad report I file tonight. Kells stepped back, breathing harder now, dignity more disturbed than balance. You should leave. No. Then when this turns, it turns on you. That's the first accurate thing you said. Kells left with controlled steps. That was better than if he'd rushed it. Men like him became clearer under restraint. Rowan went back to Dell's locker at 3 a.m. because Dell had liked patterns, and afraid men hated patterns that existed outside their reach. The locker had already been searched. Too obvious. The false bottom beneath the tool tray had not. Inside was a narrow black notebook wrapped in a frozen food inventory sheet. Dell's handwriting crossed the pages in tight, slanted lines, container numbers, shift initials, lane times. One-page sketches of movement patterns that looked at first like the doodles of a bored clerk, and at second glance, like a man trying to trap an invisible machine inside the limits of paper. Rowan sat on an overturned crate in the maintenance room and read until the first edge of daylight touched the high windows. Dell had done the hard part already. He had found the seam. Bellwether was laundering high-value cargo through legitimate night operations. Loads came in under one classification, disappeared inside the blind zones, then left under another. Sometimes lighter, sometimes heavier, always cleaner on paper than they had any right to be. The scale was large enough to require executive protection and disciplined enough to require security control. Dell had not been a heroic investigator. He had simply been too exact to ignore what the books kept confessing, and once he saw it, they had killed him. Rowan copied the key pages before dawn, sealed the notebook back into its wrap, and moved it to a place Kells would never search. Because men like Kells never imagined maintenance documents as a place where the world could hide. By midday, the room Rowan had been given in the contract housing unit had been opened and searched. Not tossed wildly, tossed by professionals working on time. Mattress lifted, bag unzipped, laptop case opened, bathroom mirror checked. It would have been cleaner if they had been less worried. Rowan stood in the middle of the room for a full minute, cataloging absence. Nothing taken that mattered. Good, that meant they still didn't know where the real risk lived. Mara arrived 5 minutes later with her jaw tight. I told no one where you were staying. I know. Kells? Probably under instruction. She looked at the turned mattress. This is where sensible people decide the contract isn't worth it. Sensible people are why places like Bellwether survive. Mara leaned against the doorframe. For the first time, Rowan saw not just tiredness in her but anger, old and layered and disciplined into usefulness. What did Dell find? She asked. Rowan handed her one copied page. She stared at the rows, then at the hand-drawn arrows connecting container numbers across nights, then back again. Jesus, she said softly. No, Rowan answered. Accounting. That almost got a laugh out of her. How high does it go? High enough that paper won't kill it. Then what will? Rowan folded the page and put it back in the inner pocket of the coat. Timing. They spent the rest of that day building a trap. Dell had noted one particular stream of flagged loads that appeared every 11 days under different paperwork but identical weight signatures. The next one was due through Bellwether just after midnight. Rowan made 2 calls from outside the port, one to a federal freight compliance office. Dell had attempted to reach twice before his death, and one to an old contact in insurance recovery who understood that you only rushed a closed system when you already had a way to keep it from closing again. Then Rowan fed Vale a version of the truth calibrated to make him choose speed. At 7:15 that evening, Rowan entered Vale's office without knocking. Vale looked up from his desk with the patient weariness of a man performing leadership for an invisible audience. This is becoming a habit, he said. Tonight's flag transfer goes through lane 6 instead of 4, Rowan said. You changed the route after the camera audit request. Vale's face remained composed. I have no idea what you're talking about. You do. I just wanted to see whether you'd deny knowledge or deny the move. Vale smiled thinly. And which answer would have made you happy? Neither. But one would have meant you were scared. And the other? Involved. Vale stood. This has gone far enough. No, Rowan said. Not yet. Vale came around the desk. Up close he seemed slightly shorter than his reputation. That pleased Rowan in a way that had nothing to do with height. Your brother died because he couldn't understand the size of the world he was touching, Vale said quietly. Don't repeat his mistake. There it was. Not a confession, something more useful. Ownership of scale. Rowan met his eyes. You built a system that only works if nobody from outside the script refuses the script. Vale's voice flattened. Leave Bellwether tonight. No, and this becomes unpleasant. Rowan gave the smallest shrug. It's already unpleasant. The difference is that you still think unpleasant belongs to you. At 11:50, Mara killed 2 routine lane lights under the pretense of a power fluctuation and rerouted standard traffic 5 minutes behind schedule. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make the wrong people move quickly. Rowan waited in the cab of a maintenance tug with a clear sightline to lane 6, Dell's copied ledger pages folded inside the coat pocket, and a body camera pinned beneath the lapel. The flagged load entered exactly when Dell's notes said it would. Vale was there in person this time. That mattered. Kells closed the lane with 2 men at his shoulder and a radio in hand. A truck rolled in under ordinary markings. Another followed unmarked, quieter, with its lights dipped. The crane operator on the assigned lane had been swapped for someone Rowan didn't recognize. Also good. Panic always made systems improvise, and improvise was where they lost their masks. Rowan waited until the first container cleared the truck bed and the serial number came into the floodlights. Wrong number, wrong lane, wrong paperwork, live movement. Rowan hit send. The body cam stream went out through the maintenance office booster Mara had quietly kept alive after Dell's death because she had stopped trusting the main network months ago. Then Rowan drove the tug straight into the lane mouth. Brakes screamed. Men shouted. Kells turned fast, saw Rowan in the lights, and for half a second looked not angry but offended. Move that damn thing, he shouted. Rowan killed the tug, stepped down, and raised a handheld flood wand Mara had borrowed from emergency maintenance. Bright white light washed over the side of the container, over the altered serial, over the cut seal, over Vale, over the men who had spent too many years thinking the night belonged to them. Lane 6, unauthorized transfer, Rowan shouted. Mive discrepancy. Full witness. Doors opened up and down the yard. Mara's reroute had done its work. Standard traffic, held back for 7 minutes, was now flowing past the sealed lane. Drivers slowed. Yard clerks turned. 2 forklift operators climbed down to see why executive had suddenly become interested in the dark. Vale stepped into the light with murder in his face, and politics still trying to cover it. Stand down, he snapped. This is a controlled compliance matter. No, Rowan said. This is your shadow inventory. Kells moved first. He came in hard and direct, choosing speed over caution because men like him always preferred the one clean use of force they understood. Rowan stepped offline, caught the wrist, used the momentum, and drove Kells shoulder first into the side of the maintenance tug. The impact boomed across the lane. One of the security men reached for Rowan from the left. Rowan hit him low in the ribs with the wand and sent him stumbling back into a bollard. The other grabbed for the camera. Mara came out of nowhere with a hook pole used for misaligned container doors and swept his arm wide enough that he lost grip and sense at the same time. None of it was graceful. That was good. Grace encouraged memory to lie. Decisive things were clearer. Kells recovered with a knife in hand. Vale saw it. So did everybody else. That was the moment the machine lost. Because once Kells drew steel under the lane lights, this was no longer a disputed internal matter. It was a public act of force inside a port whose entire visible authority depended on acting procedural. Rowan saw the calculation happen too late in Vale's eyes. Kells lunged. Rowan moved inside the line of the arm, slammed Kells's wrist against the container edge once, hard enough to make the knife jump free, then drove him down to one knee with a short strike that took all the structure out of him. Not rage, not spectacle, just removal of capacity. Kells hit the concrete, breathing in wounded bursts. The yard had gone very still. Rowan bent, picked up the knife with a rag from the tug, and set it on the hood in full view. "You should have stayed a paperwork problem," Rowan told Val. Val looked around and finally understood the true shape of his danger. Workers from 2 shifts were watching. Drivers were watching. Clerks were watching. A camera stream was no longer theoretical. Whatever he said next would have to fight not one accusation but an entire moving yard full of witnesses. He chose speech anyway because it was the only weapon he had trusted long enough to love. "This person is unstable," he said, projecting now, trying to recover the room. "Their brother died, and instead of mourning, they have transformed routine security enforcement into fantasy. Do not confuse disruption for truth." Rowan took Dell's copied page from the inside pocket and held it up. "Your original route notes," Rowan said. "Night ledger cross-checks. Container weights. Duplicate bills. Dead camera windows tied to restricted transfer times. And one more thing." From the tug cab, Rowan pulled a flat tablet linked to the maintenance office booster. The live stream had already been mirrored to the waiting compliance contact and insurance investigator. On screen was the current lane view. The serial number frozen beside the official declared manifest, both visible at once in brutal, stupid clarity. Receipt against movement. Paper against light. Lie against timing. Mara took the tablet and turned it toward the nearest cluster of workers. One of the forklift operators said, very quietly, "That's not the same box." "Exactly." The murmur that moved through the yard was not outrage first. It was recognition. That was stronger. Outrage could be talked down. Recognition meant people were matching what they saw to what they had ignored, endured, or half-known for years. Vale stepped forward as if proximity itself could restore rank. "You are making a catastrophic mistake." Rowan shook their head. "No," Dell made a careful list. "You made a fatal assumption." Sirens sounded at the outer gate. Not local police. Better. Federal freight compliance had arrived with county support and exactly the kind of paperwork that made private systems stop pretending they owned the horizon. The rest came apart quickly. Too quickly for the years hidden underneath it, maybe, but that was always the way with structures built on coordinated denial. They looked permanent right up to the second everyone had to watch them function in open light. Kells was cuffed on the concrete, furious now because fury was cheaper than fear. Vale tried 3 more versions of his voice before settling on silence. The wrong containers were isolated. The duplicate records were pulled. The lane logs stopped agreeing with one another under direct scrutiny. Men who had spent years calling night operations expendable found themselves answering questions to people who knew the difference between an incident and an operating model. At dawn, the cranes moved again. That, more than the sirens, made it feel over. Rowan stood at the edge of the upper lot with a paper cup of coffee gone cold in hand and watched the river pick up light. Bellwether did not look cleaner. It looked exposed. There was a difference. Cleanliness could be staged. Exposure had to be survived. Mara came up beside Rowan carrying a sealed evidence bag. Dell's black notebook rested inside it like something finally allowed to become itself. "They'll want statements all day," she said. "You should give one." "I will." She looked down toward the yard. Day shift supervisors were walking slower than usual. Security had a different posture now, less ownership, more employment. Somewhere below, someone laughed once, sharply, not because anything was funny, but because pressure had to leave the body somehow. Vale kept saying this place would collapse without him, Mara said. Most men like that arrange the evidence around themselves carefully. And now, Rowan took the evidence bag from her and looked at Dell's writing through the plastic. Tight lines, patient lines. The record of a man who had done the right work even after realizing right work might get him killed. "Now," Rowan said, "it has a chance to become expensive in a more honest way." That got a real laugh out of her. The sound surprised them both. Mara nodded toward the bag. He'd hate the attention. Yes, He biked the numbers winning. Rowan let that sit for a moment. Yes. Below them, morning traffic started entering the front gate. Trucks queued. Clipboards appeared. Radios crackled. Work, stripped raw for a day, was beginning to reassemble around new facts. Mara crossed her arms against the cold. You staying? Rowan looked at the river, then the road leading away from the port, then back to the yard where the night shift was finally walking out under daylight, without their shoulders clenched up around their ears. No, didn't think so. You don't need me here for the next part. That's not what I meant. Rowan almost smiled. Almost was enough. They handed her the evidence bag. Keep copies of everything. Obviously. Don't let them turn this into one bad man's private scheme. Obviously. Make them say system. This time, Mara did smile. A tired, dangerous kind of smile that belonged to someone who had spent too long being underestimated. That, she said, I can do. Rowan left Bellwether just after 8. The road from the port curved along the river for 2 miles before joining the highway. In the mirror, the cranes shrank slowly, then all at once. The morning sun laid a hard, bright line across the hood of the rental car. Rowan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the canvas bag in the passenger seat, where Dell's spare pen and key ring waited among copied pages and a spare shirt. There was grief. Of course there was grief. It sat low and dense and permanent, like weather inside the chest. But under it was something cleaner, not peace, completion. Bellwether had mistaken secrecy for control. Vale had mistaken narrative for reality. Kells had mistaken force for ownership. They had all mistaken Dell for a small enough death to bury, and Rowan for a local enough person to frighten. That had been their fatal accounting error. The road opened ahead. Rowan took it.